There are secrets that never die. They just change names, change faces, and learn to breathe in the dark. 8 years ago, a man lost the only woman who made him feel human. No body, no goodbye, no trace. 8 years later, she's carrying a tray of coffee in Charleston, and her 9-year-old son stands beside her, burying his eyes. This is a story of buried love, betrayal from the closest confidant, and the price of disappearance. Guys, please watch to the end, hit like, and comment the name of the city you're watching in, so I know how far this story has come. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It came off the Atlantic in cold, heavy sheets that bent the palmetto trees along the Charleston waterfront and turned the cobblestone streets into dark mirrors. The city didn't mind. Charleston had seen worse, had survived worse, and it wore its whetstones the way it wore everything else, with a kind of bruised architectural pride that refused to apologize for itself. Evelyn Hart moved through the dining room of Tidewater Grill the way she always moved. Efficiently, invisibly, a ghost in a black apron. She carried 4 plates on her left arm and held a 5th in her right hand without thinking about it, her body performing the geometry of the job while her mind stayed somewhere else entirely. The restaurant was loud with Friday night money. Couples dressed in soft colors leaned across candlelit tables. A table of businessmen in the back corner laughed too loudly at something that probably wasn't funny. The bar was 3 deep, voices competing with the low jazz piping through ceiling speakers that had been installed when the place still had a different name and different owners. None of it touched her. Evelyn set the plates down with quiet precision, recited the specials without hesitation, smiled when smiled at, and moved on. Her dark hair was pinned at the nape of her neck in a way that made her look capable rather than pretty, though she was both. The lines around her eyes were from something other than age. She was 31 and looked it, which in her world was a kind of accomplishment. She had built this life one careful brick at a time. The apartment 2 miles east with the deadbolt she tested twice every night. The second-hand car that ran reliably enough. The school 2 blocks from work where Rowan had 3 close friends and a teacher who called him perceptive, which Evelyn understood to mean he was too quiet for 9 years old but smart enough to hide it. She had built all of it on a foundation of borrowed documents and a name that wasn't hers, and she had told herself repeatedly that borrowed was enough, that enough was fine, that fine was all she needed. She told herself that most nights until she believed it. Then the front door opened. She didn't see him immediately. She was at table 7, refilling water, her back to the entrance. But she felt it, felt the specific shift in air pressure that happens when a room unconsciously adjusts itself around a presence it doesn't understand. The conversations didn't stop. The jazz kept going, but something contracted, some ambient animal awareness that runs beneath human noise, and Evelyn's hand slowed on the pitcher. She turned. He was standing just inside the door, shaking rain from the shoulders of a dark coat. Tall. The kind of stillness that wasn't calm. It was controlled. His face was harder than she remembered it, the jaw more set, something behind the eyes that had calcified from grief into something else over the years. He was scanning the room the way he always scanned rooms, measuring, categorizing, already knowing which exit he'd use if he needed one. Evelyn Hart's heart didn't race. It stopped. Then it started again, wrong, off rhythm, like an engine that had been damaged and repaired too many times to run clean. She turned her body before he could turn his eyes to her corner. Set the pitcher down, kept her face toward the kitchen. Don't run. Running tells him everything. The maitre d' was already moving toward him, and Evelyn used that 8-second window to walk, steady, measured, professional, through the swing door into the kitchen. She pressed her back against the stainless steel prep counter and breathed through her nose, slow and deliberate, the way she had taught herself to breathe in the bad years. Marco, the sous chef, looked up from the pass. You good? Drop something, she said. I'll get it. He went back to his station. She stood there for 11 seconds, counted them. His name was Kyle Viscari, and she had spent 8 years making sure he would never find her. She should have left then. Should have pulled off her apron, walked through the back, and disappeared into the rain-soaked alley behind the restaurant the way she had disappeared from everything else. Cleanly, completely, without a word. She knew how to do it. She had done it before. But Rowan was in the back office doing homework on her laptop, waiting for her shift to end at 10, And the thought of appearing in that doorway and saying, "We have to go right now, baby. Leave the backpack." The thought of watching her son's face absorb another uprooting without explanation made something in her chest go rigid and wrong. So she stayed. Made a decision she'd always known was coming and had spent 8 years pretending wasn't. She pushed back through the kitchen door and returned to the floor. He'd been seated at a foretop near the window, alone. He hadn't touched the menu. His coat was folded over the adjacent chair, and he was looking out at the rain-streaked glass with the expression of a man who had long since stopped expecting anything to be good. Evelyn moved to her other tables. Let Sarah, the other floor server, handle table 4. Watched from the corner of her eye as Sarah took Kyl's drink order. Scotch. She'd have bet money on it, and she was right, and felt the particular degradation of hoping he would simply eat and leave. He didn't leave. He sat with his scotch and ordered nothing else, and stayed. At 9:45, the restaurant had thinned to a handful of late tables. Evelyn was running a credit card at the terminal near the bar when she heard the chair legs on hardwood behind her and understood, without turning, that the moment she had constructed an entire life to avoid had arrived. Evelyn. He wasn't loud about it. He never needed to be. She finished processing the card, took the slip, turned around. Up close, the years were visible on him in a different way than she'd initially registered. There were new scars, a thin white line along his jaw that hadn't been there before, something healed ugly on the back of his right hand. He was 40 now, maybe 41, and the authority he'd always carried had gone from inherited to earned, which made it worse somehow, more real, less possible to dismiss. "You have the wrong person," she said. "No." His voice was flat, not angry, just certain. "My name is Evelyn Hart. I've worked here for 2 years. I live on Stop." He said it quietly. "Please don't do that." She looked at him for a long moment. The bar noise was behind her. The piano player across the room had shifted into something slower, which felt like bad timing. She was aware of the maitre d' glancing their way, assessing, and she made her face do the thing it had learned to do. Neutral, manageable. The face of a woman who is politely ending an awkward conversation with a man she doesn't know. "I need you to leave," she said. "I know." He didn't move. "I need 5 minutes." "I'm working." "I know that too." He paused. "I've been sitting here for 2 hours trying to figure out whether what I was seeing was real." His jaw tightened. "It's real." Something passed through her. Not warmth, not grief, something older and more structural than either. The thing you feel when a wall you built with your own hands begins to crack from the inside. "Table 14 needs their check," she said to no one, and walked away from him toward the back of the restaurant. She didn't hear him follow. She didn't expect to. She went to the back office and opened the door. Rowan looked up from the laptop. He was wearing his soccer jersey over a long-sleeved shirt, and his dark hair was going in 4 directions at once. He had her cheekbones and someone else's eyes, and she had spent 9 years teaching herself not to see whose. "Almost done?" he asked. "Almost." She smiled at him. The specific smile she kept reserved for him, the only one in her entire repertoire that wasn't borrowed. "Give me 20 minutes. You said 10. I know. 20 now." He sighed elaborately and went back to the screen. She closed the door behind her. "Portième." At 10 past 10, when the last table had paid and the bussers were turning chairs, she found Kyl waiting by the kitchen entrance. He hadn't left. Of course he hadn't. "Kitchen's closed," she said. "I know. You need to go. After you talk to me." She looked at the swing door behind her, calculating the distance, the options. Marco was still at the back cleaning station, the dishwasher, the alley door that opened onto Rutledge Avenue. She'd walked it 600 times in 2 years. 5 minutes, she said. "Kitchen." She pushed through into the fluorescent light and industrial stainless steel, and he followed her in and let the door swing closed behind them. Marco glanced up, registered a customer where customers weren't supposed to be, and Evelyn said, "It's fine, Marco. Give us a minute," in the tone that meant it wasn't a question, and Marco took his cleaning cloth and moved to the far end of the room with the practiced discretion of a man who'd worked enough late nights to know some things weren't his business. She turned to face him with a prep counter between them. "How did you find me?" she said. Not a question. She already knew there was no answer that would help her. "Accident," he said. "I was in Charleston for something else. A contact of mine suggested this place. I walked in and—" He stopped, ran a hand across the back of his neck. "You cut your hair." "Kyle." "It used to be longer." "Kyle." 8 years, Aurora. The name hit her physical. She actually flinched, a small involuntary contraction of her whole body. The name she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself it had belonged to someone else. "Don't call me that," she said. "What am I supposed to call you?" "Nothing. You're not supposed to call me anything because this conversation isn't happening." His eyes were steady on her, and his jaw was working in that way she remembered from long ago, the way it worked when he was holding something large and ugly in place through discipline alone. "I spent $2.5 million looking for you," he said. 4 years of active investigation, 3 different firms." She said nothing. "They all said the same thing, that you were gone, that if you were alive you didn't want to be found." He paused. "I told myself I could live with that whatever happened, you had your reasons." "I did." "Tell me." "No." "Tell me why you—" He stopped himself. Something moved across his face. Not weakness, but the ghost of it, a thing he had built armor over and could still sometimes feel. "You were carrying my child." The fluorescent lights hummed. The dishwasher ran in the back. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "The boy." The air in the kitchen changed. "He's 9 years old," Kyle said. "He has—" His voice broke for the first time, just at the edge, then came back controlled. "He has my father's eyes. My father who I watched die when I was 12, who I have not seen that particular shade of gray in any other living human being." He looked at her straight. "Don't tell me I'm wrong." Evelyn's hands were flat on the prep counter. The stainless steel was cold. She focused on that. The temperature, the texture, the physical reality of the surface beneath her palms. The way she'd learned to anchor herself in the bad years when panic came looking. "His name is Rowan," she said, finally, quietly. The sound Kyle Vescari made was not loud. It was barely audible. But it was the sound of a man absorbing something that rearranges the structure of everything he thought he understood. And it was the worst thing she had heard in a very long time. "Rowan," he repeated. "Yes." "He doesn't know." "No. You never know." He put both hands on the opposite edge of the prep counter. She watched him breathe, watched him hold himself together through something she couldn't fully measure. Whatever she had expected from this moment, and she had run it in her mind hundreds of times, 100 different versions, she had not expected this. She had expected rage, had expected the controlled, precise fury that was his register for betrayal. She had not expected to watch him look like a man who has just been told a war he thought he'd lost was actually still going on. "Why?" he said. Just that. "Because you would have been killed." She hadn't meant to say it. The words came out before the armor could stop them. He looked up. "I found something," she said. Her voice was level but costing her. "In your compound. Documents. I wasn't supposed to see them. I was in the East Wing, and the wrong door was open, and—" She stopped. "Someone inside your organization staged evidence, made it look like you ordered Marcus's death." The name landed. She watched him absorb it. "Your brother," he said. "My brother." She looked at him directly for the first time. "I found what looked like a kill order, with your authorization codes, with your signature on the routing confirmation." She held it, held the memory, the specific sick terror of standing in that hallway with paper in her hands. "And 2 days later, Marcus was dead." "Aurora, do not tell me I was wrong." Her voice came out with more force than she intended. "I know what I saw. I know what I believed. And I know that I was 3 months pregnant, and there were men inside your organization who already knew I'd been in that room, and I had—" She exhaled. "I had 48 hours to be gone or be dead, so I was gone." The kitchen was very quiet. Kale's face had done something complex, and she couldn't read all of it. "I didn't order Marcus's death," he said. I know that now. You know, I figured it out eventually. 3 years later, when I was far enough away to think clearly, she pressed her palms harder against the counter. Someone staged it. Someone inside your organization wanted me gone and wanted you blamed, and they used Marcus to do it. He was very still. Who? I don't know. I never knew for certain. The dishwasher cycle ended and the kitchen went quieter still. Outside through the single high window, she could see rain still moving against the dark. 8 years, he said. Yes. You could have... What? She cut him off, not unkindly. Come back? Walked in and said, I'm sorry I disappeared. I've reconsidered. You know what your world is, Kyle. You know what happens to people who know things they shouldn't. I had a child to protect. Something shifted in his expression at that. At child. The word doing something to him she could watch happening in real time. I want to meet him, he said. No. He's my son. He's a 9-year-old boy who has a stable life and a mother who is not going to let you walk in and... Aurora. His voice dropped, went very quiet. I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm not... He stopped. Started again differently. I just need you to understand that I have been looking for you. That I did not... That whatever you saw, whatever you believed, I would not have... He stopped again. The jaw working. I would not have hurt you. Or him. She looked at him for a long time. She had known this man for 4 years before she ran, had known him the way you know someone when you are inside their life at its most unguarded, had seen the things he was capable of, both terrible and human, and had loved him with the specific, impractical clarity that comes before you learn better. She had run from what she believed he'd done, not from who he was. That was the part that had always been the most complicated. You need to leave, she said. Tonight. You need to go back to wherever you came from and not, someone followed me into the city. She stopped. I noticed them outside, 2 vehicles, one on Bay Street, one parked on Broad. His eyes were serious and had gone flat in the specific way they went when he was processing threat. They were already here, before I walked in tonight. He looked at her. I don't think my finding you was as accidental as I believed. The cold in her hands moved up into her chest. Which means, he said slowly, that whoever has been looking for you may have gotten here first. Evelyn didn't breathe for 3 full seconds. Then she turned and walked quickly toward the back office, and before she got to the door, she heard it. Not from inside the restaurant, but from outside, from the alley behind the building. The particular sound of a vehicle that had been running quietly and had just turned off its engine and gone still. She pushed open the office door. Rowan looked up. His face, her son's face, with those gray eyes that she had never once let herself think about too clearly, open and 9 years old and waiting for her. Mom, he said. What's wrong? She crossed the room, picked up his backpack from the floor, and held out her hand. We're going out the front, she said. Right now. He stood without questioning. He had learned in his short life to read the register of her voice when it meant now, and he took her hand and she pulled him toward the door. Behind her, Kyle Vescari stood in the kitchen doorway, and in the alley outside the building's rear exit, someone tested the handle of the door. The handle turned once, stopped. Evelyn had Rowan's wrist and was moving before the second attempt, pulling him through the office doorway and into the narrow corridor that connected the back of the restaurant to the main dining room. Kyle was already ahead of them somehow, already through the kitchen and into the corridor, and she hated that about him. Hated how fast he moved for a man his size. Hated that her body still registered his proximity the way it did, as something between warning and gravity. How many? She said under her breath. 2 outside. Maybe more I didn't see. He didn't look back at her. He was watching the front windows through the dining room glass. The street, the parked cars, the particular quality of stillness that meant something was waiting. You have a car? Yes. Where? Side lot off Rutledge. But if they have the alley, they have the lot. Probably. Rowan was very quiet between them. That was the thing about her son that had always frightened her a little. Not his fear, but the absence of it in moments when most children would be loud with it. He moved with her and kept his mouth shut, and his eyes wide open, taking in everything, and she could feel him processing in that particular way he had that was too old for his face. "Mom," he said. "Quiet. Who is he?" "Not now, baby." "Is he why we're—" "Rowan." The word came out harder than she intended, and she felt him go still beside her. "Please." Carol glanced back at the boy. Something happened in his face, a kind of collision between the situation and something private, and he looked away again quickly. Marco appeared from the kitchen doorway. "Hey, what the hell is—" "Back exit," KL said. "Don't use it tonight. Lock your staff in the walk-in for 10 minutes. "Do it now." Marco stared at him. "Now," KL said again, with the particular flatness that wasn't a request. And Marco, to his credit, looked at Evelyn once and then went back through the swing door without another word. Some instructions carry their own authority regardless of their source. They reached the front of the restaurant. The maitre d' station was empty. The last of the front staff had gone. The dining room was chairs up and dim. Through the front glass, Kael scanned the street for 4 full seconds. Black SUV on the corner, engines off, but there's exhaust vapor. He stepped back from the glass. Side street. Comes out on Wentworth. They'll have that too if they're thorough. Are they thorough? She thought about it honestly. Thought about the last 8 years, the moves she'd made, the near misses she'd always told herself were coincidence. "I don't know who they are," she said, which was mostly true. Cale looked at her with an expression that said he heard the mostly. "We'll talk about that later." He pulled his phone and sent a text in 3 seconds flat and pocketed it. "I have someone 2 blocks east. He'll bring a vehicle to the alley off Church Street." He looked at the boy again, then back at her. "That's a 3-minute walk. Through open street." "Yes." She calculated. 3 minutes of exposure against waiting in a building that had men at its back door. Neither good. One slightly less bad. "Go," she said. Well, the rain had not let up. They moved through it with their heads down, Evelyn keeping Rowan's hand in hers and Kyle slightly ahead, his coat dark and heavy with water. Church Street was quiet this late, residential, the old pastel houses closed up behind their iron gates, the light from window interiors, the muted gold of people in for the evening. She watched every parked car they passed, watched the junctions, felt the specific alertness she had spent years in recovery from and years in practice of, the old survival wiring that never fully went dormant. Rowan matched her pace without complaint. His backpack bounced against his shoulders. She could hear him breathing, steady, controlled, and she had a sudden vivid memory of herself at his age, being pulled through a different kind of night by a different parent, and she shut it down hard. A black sedan pulled to the curb at the far end of the block. The driver's window came down and a man looked out. Late 40s, heavy set, a face Evelyn didn't know, but Kael clearly did, because he raised 2 fingers in the man's direction and the back door opened. "Get in," Kael said. She stopped walking. He turned back to her. "Get in your car," she said, "and go wherever you came from. Take Rowan and me out of this. Leave tonight. Don't come back." "There are people in this city right now who know you're alive," he said. The rain ran down the side of his face, and he didn't wipe it. "That did not happen by accident. Someone told them you were here, and whoever told them—" He paused. "They've been waiting for me to find you." "What does that mean?" "It means this isn't over just because I leave." His eyes were steady on her. "It was never over. You just didn't know it was still happening." She stared at him. Rowan stood between them in the rain, looking up at her with those gray eyes, waiting. She got in the car. The driver's name was Garrett. He didn't speak, and she didn't ask him to. He took them north and then west, away from the waterfront, through the back edges of the city, where the streets widened and the houses spread out, and the darkness between streetlights was longer and more complete. Rowan sat between her and the door with his backpack on his lap. At some point, he had developed an intense interest in the window, watching the wet city slide past, and she understood he was giving her and Kael whatever privacy 2 people could have in the back seat of a moving car. Her son had always been perceptive. His teacher wasn't wrong about that. "Who followed you?" she said. Kael was looking straight ahead. "I don't know yet. I have people working on the plates." How long have you had a tail? I noticed them when I landed. Assumed it was local. Someone who wanted to know my business in the city. He paused. It didn't occur to me they were already here for you. Why were you in Charleston? Business. What kind? The kind that's finished. He turned to look at her. In the moving dark of the car, his face was cut into planes of light and shadow, the older version of a face she had spent years trying to forget. The kind that has nothing to do with this. I need to know if your being here made this worse. I don't know yet. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have right now. His voice was controlled, but she could hear the tension underneath it. The same tension she remembered from the nights when something was moving in the dark, and he didn't yet know what direction it would come from. What do you know about who wanted you dead 8 years ago? I told you, someone inside your organization faked evidence. I know what you told me. I'm asking what you know, not what you believed when you ran, what you know now. She looked at her son's profile against the window. 9 years old, the back of his neck, the way his hair curled just slightly at the collar. I have a name, she said, quietly. I developed it over years. I can't prove anything. Tell me. Not with Rowan in the car. A long pause. Then Cale said, Garrett. Yeah. There's a motel on Dorchester Road. Take the back entrance. Garrett nodded once. She felt Rowan shift beside her, felt his shoulder press against hers with a small, deliberate weight, and she pressed back. The motel room was clean enough. 2 beds, a wall unit pushing out dry, warm air, a bathroom with a light that buzzed. Garrett stayed with the car. Evelyn got Rowan settled on the far bed with the laptop and his headphones and a bag of chips from the vending machine down the hall, and when she was sure his attention was genuinely inside the screen and not on the room, she moved to the small table by the window where Kyle was sitting with his phone and his fourth expression of the night. The focused one, the tactical one, the face he wore when he was running options. She sat across from him. Lucien Dre, she said. He went very still. You know the name, she said. He was my advisor. His voice came out measured in the way that meant he was measuring it. He has been with my organization for 18 years. He helped me build it from... He stopped. Why? Because he's the one who had access to your authorization codes. I figured that out 2 years after I left. I was trying to reconstruct it from memory, everything I'd seen in those documents, and the routing structure wasn't yours. It was someone mimicking yours, and the only people who knew your routing protocols in detail were the inner circle. She kept her voice low, kept her eyes on his face. I ran down every person in that circle I could find records of, and Lucien Dre was the only one who had both the access and the motive. What motive? I don't know the full shape of it, but he had been moving resources laterally for at least a year before I ran. Small amounts, slow movements, the kind of thing that disappears inside a large operation if no one's looking specifically. She paused. Someone was positioning to take over, and the only person standing in the way was you. Kyle sat with this. She watched him processing, the discipline of it, the way he didn't let the personal reaction reach his face, even when she could see it was there, underneath, pressing up. If Lucien is the one who sent people here tonight, he started. Then he's known I was alive and waited, she said. Waited for you to find me. Because me being out in the open was more useful to him than me being permanently gone. She held it for a second. Or he's been watching your search and decided it was time to end it before you got there yourself. Either way, he knew. Either way, he knew. Kyle set his phone face down on the table. A gesture she recognized. It meant he was making himself set something aside temporarily because the thing in front of him required full attention. You should have come to me, he said. She looked at him. 8 years ago. You should have come to me with what you found. I just told you the evidence was designed to look like you ordered my brother's murder. And you believed it. I was 23 years old, and I was 3 months pregnant, and my brother was dead, and I had 48 hours before whoever staged it came back to clean up the witness. Her voice stayed level. It cost something. What exactly should I have done differently? Trusted me. I did trust you. That's why it worked. She looked at him straight. Whoever did this knew that the one thing that could make me run without asking questions was a threat that came with your name on it. They knew exactly how much faith I had in you, and they used it as a weapon. She paused. That's not a failure of mine. That's a failure of your house. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It had the quality of something true settling into a space that hadn't been shaped to hold it. Cale's jaw was working. I know, he said finally. Do you? Yes. He looked up at her. I know. I've known for years that there was something wrong in my organization. I didn't know what it was or where it started. I pulled people, restructured twice. Whatever I was looking for, I couldn't find it because I didn't know what I was looking for. He paused. Now I do. Knowing and being able to prove it aren't the same thing. No. Something shifted in his eyes. But I don't always need proof. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room temperature. Don't do that, she said. Whatever you're thinking, don't. Lucien Dre murdered your brother and stole 8 years from... And if you go at him without evidence, without a case, you become exactly what he made you look like in those documents I found. She leaned forward slightly. He wins, even if you kill him, because you become the man he invented. Kael was quiet for a long moment. From across the room, Rowan's headphones leaked faint sound. Some video, some cartoon normalcy that felt surreal in the context of the table where she was sitting. He's good, Kael said. Not looking at her, looking at the boy. She didn't answer. Does he know anything? About his... He knows his father wasn't in the picture, she said carefully. He knows I left a situation that wasn't safe. He doesn't know details. You never told him my name. No. Kael absorbed that. The way he absorbed it was different from the rage she'd expected. It was more like a man absorbing a document, cataloging damage, already moving past emotion into the question of what gets done now. He's going to need to know, he said. Not tonight. No, not tonight. He picked up his phone. Garrett is going to take you somewhere safe. Not a motel, a property. Owned under a company name, nothing traceable. You'll have security. I'm not Aurora. He used the name again, deliberately this time. I know you've been running this on your own for 8 years. I know you're good at it. But whoever is in this city tonight came here because they know I found you, which means they are connected to my world at a level where my resources are the appropriate counter. He looked at her. Let me use them. She wanted to say no, could feel the no sitting right there. Solid and familiar and 8 years in the making. She looked at Rowan instead. One condition, she said. Name it. Nothing happens to Lucien Dre without evidence that holds up. Nothing outside the law. She watched him. I have a son. I need this to end in a way where he doesn't lose his father before he gets to know him. Something moved through Kael's face at father, rapid and unguarded for just a second, gone before she could fully read it. Agreed, he said. She didn't entirely believe him, but she nodded. Garrett drove them to a property off Maybank Highway, an older house set back from the road behind live oaks, the kind of place that looked disused but wasn't. 2 men were already there when they arrived, positioned with the particular posture of people who were paid to look at the perimeter instead of at the house. Evelyn clocked them immediately, clocked the sight lines, clocked the exits. Old habit. Never fully dormant. She got Rowan into a room with a real bed and sat with him while he came down from the adrenaline he'd been running on without showing anyone. Mom, he said once the lights were out and she was sitting on the edge of the mattress. Yeah. That man. A pause. He looked at me like he was counting something. She didn't answer right away. Listened to the rain on the roof, so still going, relentless, the way Carolina storms went sometimes, deciding to stay. Go to sleep, she said. Is he bad? She thought about that with more honesty than she could give him. Thought about what Kael Vescari was, not what he'd been made into by circumstances or enemies or the specific cruelties of the world he'd built and been built by, but what he actually was, at the level she'd known him before everything fractured. No, she said. He's not bad, but something's wrong. Something was wrong a long time ago, she said. We're trying to fix it. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then, is it going to be okay? She put her hand on his shoulder through the blanket. Yes, she said, certain the way she said things when she needed them to be true. Go to sleep. She waited until his breathing slowed. Then she went to find Kyle. He was in the kitchen, standing at the window with the lights off, just the glow of his phone screen and the ambient gray of the rainy night outside. He had his jacket off, and she could see the shoulder holster he'd been wearing underneath it, the weight of what he carried. He didn't hear her come in, or pretended not to. Your people find anything on the plates? She asked. Yes. He set the phone on the counter and turned. His face was different in the dark, less constructed, more tired. The vehicles were registered to a shell company out of Delaware. 3 layers removed, but my guy traced it back to a logistics firm in New York. He paused. The firm has 3 corporate addresses. One of them is a building in Midtown that I own. She felt the specific cold of that settle into the room. So it's him, she said. It's him. He said it without inflection, which was worse than if he'd said it with rage. He used my own company structure to fund the people he sent here tonight. A pause. Which means he's been running operations out of my infrastructure for, I don't know how long. Long enough. Yes. He picked up the phone again, put it down. I have a meeting with him tomorrow morning, standing appointment every other Thursday. It was scheduled before I came to Charleston. He looked at her. He doesn't know I know. Don't cancel it, she said immediately. I wasn't going to. Good. You need that meeting. You need him thinking everything is normal while I build the case. He nodded once. I know how to do this. Do you? She looked at him with the directness she'd had to grow over 8 years, the thing that replaced the trust she used to carry more easily. Because you were doing this 8 years ago and you didn't see him. The words landed and she let them stand, didn't soften them. Cale's jaw tightened. No, he said. I didn't see him. So what's different now? Now I know what I'm looking for. He held her gaze. And now I have something worth protecting. She didn't look away and he didn't either, and the kitchen was very quiet except for the rain. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, had lived by the discipline of not answering unknown numbers. But something in the timing made her stomach drop, and she picked up. Silence on the line for 2 seconds. Then a voice she recognized from 8 years ago. A voice she had last heard in a hallway in a different life. Smooth and measured in the way of men who had practiced sounding reasonable for so long they'd forgotten how to sound anything else. Hello, Aurora, said Lucian Dre. I think it's time we had a conversation. She went completely still. I know where you are, he continued. I know who you're with, and I know about the boy. A pause. Deliberately timed, she understood, designed to let the weight of the boy settle fully. Tell Kyle I said hello. And tell him that if he makes the mistake of treating this as a war, the first casualty will not be someone he can affect. Evelyn could hear Lucian Dre breathing on the other end. Slow, patient, the breathing of a man who had decided a long time ago that he was the smartest person in any room he entered and had never been sufficiently contradicted. The kitchen was dark around her, the rain on the roof. Kyle 3 feet away, watching her face read the situation before she'd said a word. She put the call on speaker. Say that again, she said. I said the first casualty will not be someone Kyle can afford to lose. Lucien's voice was the same as she remembered it, baritone, unhurried, with the faint trace of old money somewhere in the consonants. I want to be very clear that this is not a threat. It's a description of reality. Kyle operates best when the variables are contained. Right now the variables are not contained. Kyle's hand came out and she gave him the phone. His face had gone to the flat tactical register, but underneath it she could see something operating at a different temperature entirely. Lucien, he said. A brief pause. Kyle, I'm glad you're both in the same room. It simplifies this. Where are you? Comfortable. Don't waste the question. A pause. I want to tell you something and I need you to hear it without reacting. Can you do that? Talk. Everything you think happened 8 years ago, you have about 40% of it, maybe less. Aurora has a different 40%. Neither of you has the part that changes what the other 40 means. A slight pause, as if he were choosing the next words with genuine care. I'm willing to give you the complete picture, in person. Tomorrow morning, our meeting, as scheduled. And in exchange, Kael said, in exchange, you come alone, you come without having done anything irreversible tonight, and you listen before you decide what you want to do. Another pause. The boy stays out of it. That was never my intention, and it will not become my intention. I need you to believe that. Kael's eyes moved to Evelyn. She shook her head once, small, precise, meaning don't trust it. I'll be there, Kael said. Good. The line went quiet for a moment. Kael, I did what I did for reasons that made complete sense at the time. I still believe that, but I'm old enough to understand that belief and correctness are not the same thing. Another pause. Get some sleep. The call ended. Kael set the phone on the counter with the deliberate care of a man not throwing it through the window. Don't go, Evelyn said. I have to go. He's setting the terms. He chose the location, the time, the conditions. I know. He turned to look at her. And he's right that I don't have the whole picture. Neither do you. His jaw was tight. He said there's a part neither of us has, the part that changes what we think we know. That's a manipulation. That's designed to get you into a room. Maybe, he picked up his jacket. Or maybe there's something real in it, and I've been running an incomplete investigation for 8 years because I didn't know what piece I was missing. He looked at her steadily. I'm going. I need you to stay here with Rowan and not move until I contact you. She wanted to argue. Could feel the architecture of the argument in her chest, fully formed. But she looked at his face, the set of it, the particular version of determined that meant a decision had calcified past the point of conversation, and she let it go. If you're not back by noon, she said, I'm taking Rowan and I'm gone. Fair. I mean it. I know you mean it. He held her gaze for a moment. Get some sleep. She listened to him cross the front room and speak briefly with one of the men outside, and then the sound of Garrett's car starting and pulling away down the gravel drive, and then the rain, and then nothing. She stood in the dark kitchen for a long time. Well, she didn't sleep. She lay on the couch with her shoes on and her mind running the same calculations it had been running for 8 years, just with new variables inserted. Lucienne Dre, the voice she remembered from a handful of meetings inside Kael's compound, advisory sessions she'd occasionally been present for in the periphery, the trusted elder statesman of the operation, silver-haired and considered, the man Kael consulted when decisions needed the weight of long experience behind them. She had never liked him, had never been able to articulate why specifically, had told herself it was the generic wariness she carried toward everyone in that world, which was different from the targeted wariness you develop toward specific threats. Maybe she should have trusted the generic wariness more. At 5 a.m, Rowan appeared in the doorway in his socks, his hair wrecked from sleep, carrying the laptop against his chest like a shield. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. Bad dream? He crossed the room and sat beside her feet on the couch without asking permission, the way he'd done since he was small. Where'd the man go? He had something to do. Is he coming back? She looked at her son's profile in the gray pre-dawn light coming through the window glass, the line of his jaw, the particular way he held his shoulders when he was trying to be older than he was. Yes, she said. Rowan nodded slowly, processing something, then, he's my dad. She went very still. Rowan, I'm not asking. His voice was quiet and completely certain in the way of children who have been turning a thing over in private for long enough to arrive at their own answer. I'm saying it because it's true, and because you look at him the way you only look at things that matter. He glanced at her. And because he looks at me like he's trying to figure out how to say sorry for something. She opened her mouth. Closed it. It's okay, he said. I'm not mad. Baby, I'm not. He meant it, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. I just wanted you to know that I know. He opened the laptop. I'm going to watch something. She put her hand on the top of his head, and he let her, and they sat like that in the dim room while the rain finally, slowly, began to ease. Kale arrived at the meeting 20 minutes early. The location was a private dining room above a members' club in the French Quarter of Charleston, a place that operated without advertising itself, the kind of establishment that existed because certain categories of business required a room without ears. Kyle had used it for 15 years, so had Lucien. The room was already set when he arrived. Coffee, 2 cups, a window that overlooked the wet street below. No one else present. Lucien arrived at exactly 9, came in without knocking, hung his coat, sat down, and poured himself coffee with the ease of a man in his own house. He was 63. Silver hair kept short, face that had aged into something distinguished from something merely handsome, a dark suit that fit him well. He looked like what he had always looked like, the kind of man institutions trusted. "You look tired," Lucien said. "Talk," Kael said. Lucien sipped his coffee, unhurried. "I'm going to tell you something, and it's going to be difficult to hear. I'm asking you to hold whatever you feel until I've finished. I'll decide what I hold." "Fair enough." Lucien set down the cup. "Marcus Vale didn't die because of me." The room was very quiet. "Marcus Vale," Lucien continued, "was working for a federal task force for 14 months before his death. He was Aurora's brother, and he loved her genuinely, and he spent 14 months feeding information about your organization to a federal prosecutor's office in New York." He paused. "I found out 6 weeks before he died. I brought it to you." Kale's hands were flat on the table. "You never." "I did." Lucien's voice didn't rise. "March, 8 years ago, you and I sat in your study for 2 hours. I told you everything I had confirmed about Marcus, the handler, the case file reference number, the specific operations he had compromised." He looked at Kale directly. "You told me to handle it." The silence had a different quality now. "I didn't," Kale started. "You said, 'Handle it. I don't want to know the details.'" Lucien's eyes were steady. "Those were your exact words. I have never forgotten them because I spent the following 8 years living inside what they cost." He paused. "I didn't want to. I want to be clear about that. Marcus was 26 years old, and his only crime was believing he could dismantle something that couldn't be dismantled from the outside. But you gave me an instruction, and I followed it, because that is what I had always done, and because I did not yet understand what it would set in motion." Kyle was not moving, was not breathing, or was breathing in a way that produced no visible evidence. "Aurora found the documents because I wasn't careful enough," Lucien said. "The routing confirmation, the authorization codes. She saw something she wasn't supposed to see, and she drew the only conclusion the evidence supported." He paused. "But the authorization codes were real, Kyle. She wasn't wrong about what ordered Marcus's death. She was wrong about who gave the original instruction." The room expanded and contracted around a fact that Kyle was trying to hold at a distance and failing. "You're saying he started. "I'm saying you gave an instruction without fully meaning it, in the way powerful men sometimes do. And I executed it in the way men who have served powerful men too long sometimes do." Lucien's voice was not accusatory. It was worse than that. It was accurate. "I made a catastrophic error, and then, to protect myself, I engineered a secondary deception. The documents Aurora found were designed to point back to you without pointing back to me. I needed her gone before she could investigate further, and I needed you blaming yourself if you ever pieced it together, because a man consumed by guilt doesn't look outward for the source of his wound." Kale's jaw had gone rigid. "The men I sent to Charleston last night were not to harm her," Lucien said, "or the boy. I need you to believe that." "Then what were they for?" "To contain the situation. To ensure that whatever conversation you and Aurora had didn't move in a direction I couldn't manage." He paused. "I have spent 8 years managing this. The case against your organization, Marcus's case file, was never fully closed. There is a prosecutor in New York who has been waiting for a reason to reopen it. If Aurora resurfaces, if she talks to the wrong people, if she decides that the woman she buried can be exhumed for the purpose of justice, you were protecting yourself, Kael said. Yes. Lucien said it without flinching. I was protecting myself and by extension everything we built together, which was also protecting you. Whether you choose to see it that way is your decision. Kael stood up from the table. Sit down, Lucien said. Don't sit down. The voice had changed, the patient reasonableness gone, something older and harder underneath it. Because there is still the part you don't have, the part I told you about last night. And you need to hear it before you do whatever you're already planning to do. Kael stood at the window for 3 seconds. Then he sat. The federal prosecutor, Lucien said, has a source still active inside your organization. Not Marcus. Marcus is long dead. A different source. Someone currently in your inner circle, currently attending your operational meetings, currently passing summaries to a federal handler every 2 weeks. He let that sit. I identified them 4 months ago. I have not told you until now because I needed to understand the full scope before I brought it to you. He paused. The source is Garrett. Something cold moved through Kael from the base of his spine. Garrett, who had picked them up off Church Street in the rain last night, who had driven Evelyn and Rowan to the safe house off Maybank Highway, who was, at this moment, positioned outside that house with knowledge of its location, its layout, and its security. Kael had his phone out before Lucien finished the sentence. He called the security line for the Maybank property. It rang 7 times. No answer. He called the second number. The man he had stationed at the east perimeter. Rang 4 times. Voicemail. Kael was already moving, already through the door and into the hallway, coat in his hand, and he heard Lucien say something behind him, but it was already just sound, already just noise, already buried under the specific focused terror of a man who has just understood that the danger he moved his family away from last night was driven directly to them by his own hand. He hit the stairs at a run. Chet. It took him 19 minutes to reach the Maybank property. The front gate was open. Not forced. The code had been entered correctly, which meant Garrett, or someone with Garrett's code, had opened it from the outside. The 2 men he'd stationed at the perimeter were zip-tied to the iron fence at the side of the property, conscious, furious, and unable to reach their phones. Kael cut them loose with the knife he kept at his ankle and didn't stop moving toward the house. The front door was unlocked. He went through fast, low, clearing the entry hall, the main room, the kitchen. Everything still. Coffee mug on the counter, Rowan's backpack on the floor by the couch, unzipped, a library book half pulled out. Evidence of a morning interrupted, not a morning ended. No violence, no blood, nothing overturned. He cleared every room. Empty. He stood in the center of the main room and breathed through his nose and ran it. Garrett had known the location since last night. If he'd wanted them taken, they could have been taken in the night. He hadn't moved then. He'd waited until morning, until Kael was across the city in a meeting, until the security detail was manageable. That timing was deliberate, which meant this wasn't a kill order. Not yet. This was a removal. Containment. Someone had taken Aurora and Rowan as leverage. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. They're safe. Garrett's voice, professional, unhurried. I need you to understand that they are not harmed and will not be harmed if you do what I'm going to ask. Where are you? That's not how this works, Kael. Where? Listen. The professional tone cracked slightly, just at the edge. I didn't want this. I need you to know that. I've been trying to find a way out of this for 2 years, and there isn't one. And the people I answer to decided last night that the situation had become uncontainable. A brief pause. They want the files, the operational archive, everything in the encrypted server at your New York office, full access, transferred to an external drive, left at a location they'll specify. You have 6 hours. And if I give them the archive, they walk away. You get Aurora and the boy back. Everything ends. And if I don't? Silence on the line for 2 full seconds. Garrett. Kael's voice went to a register he rarely used. Very quiet, very specific. The register of a man saying the last words before something breaks. If anything happens to that boy, 6 hours, Garrett said. I'm sorry, Kael. I genuinely am. The line went dead. Cale stood in the empty house with his dead phone and the sound of the last of the rain dripping from the eaves, and he understood that in the space of 12 hours he had found his son, lost him, been told he had given the order that destroyed his family, and been handed proof that his empire had been hollowed out from two directions simultaneously, from above by a man he'd trusted like family, and from within by a man he'd trusted with the lives of the people that mattered most. He had 6 hours. He had no allies he could currently verify. He had an encrypted archive that contained enough evidence to dismantle everything he'd built, and enough evidence, if properly deployed, to dismantle Lucien Dre and whoever Garrett reported to along with it. And somewhere in this city was a 9-year-old boy with gray eyes, sitting in a room with his mother, waiting for a father he'd only just begun to. 6 hours. Kyle stood in the empty house and counted his assets the way he'd learned to count them 20 years ago. Not what he wished he had, not what he'd had yesterday, only what was in his hands right now in this specific moment with this specific clock running. His phone. 40% battery. 2 contacts he could reach who weren't connected to Garrett's chain and weren't connected to Lucien Izien's. A knife at his ankle. The car Garrett had left in the driveway when he took the security detail down, keys still in the ignition, which was either careless or deliberate, and either way it was transportation. The encrypted archive on a server in New York that 2 separate factions now wanted, and that represented both the greatest danger he possessed and the only real leverage he had. And the meeting with Lucien, which was still technically in progress, which meant Lucien didn't yet know that Kyle had left the room knowing what he knew. He made 2 calls in 4 minutes. The first was to a woman named Solis, not a real name, a name she'd used for the 15 years she'd worked as his forensic accountant, a woman who knew the architecture of his financial empire better than he did, and who operated with the specific loyalty of someone who'd been treated fairly in a world where that was rare. He told her what he needed in 40 seconds. She said she could do it remotely. He told her she had 4 hours, and she said she'd need 3.5 and hung up. The second call was to a man named Petrov, who worked out of a private security firm in Atlanta and who owed Kyle a debt that had been outstanding for 6 years. Petrov answered on the first ring. Kyle gave him the address of the Maybank property and told him to bring 4 men in body armor and to trust no one already on site. Petrov didn't ask questions. That was why the debt had always been worth holding. Then Kyle got in the car and drove. He drove toward the harbor. He knew where Garrett had taken them. Not because Garrett had told him, because Kyle had owned a warehouse facility on the north edge of Charleston Harbor for 11 years, used it for legitimate freight operations and occasionally for less legitimate purposes. And it was the one location in this city that Garrett knew with the detail required for exactly this kind of operation. Garrett had helped him run 2 separate security assessments of that facility in the past 4 years. He knew its blind spots, its entry points, its radio dead zones. It was also, Kyle understood with a particular cold clarity, the location Garrett would have chosen because it sent a message. I know everything about your world. I've been inside it long enough to use it against you. The harbor was gray and choppy under the post-rain sky. The storm had finally stopped, but the water hadn't gotten the message yet, and the surface of the Cooper River heaved in slow swells that slapped against the dock pilings with metronomic regularity. The freight facility was a long, low structure of corrugated steel and old brick at the waterline, surrounded by shipping containers stacked 3 and 4 high that created a geography of narrow corridors and blocked sightlines. Cale parked 6 blocks north and went in on foot. He moved along the container corridors with his back to the steel, checking junctions before crossing them, keeping the knife in his right hand and the phone dark in his pocket. The facility had 3 entry points on the landward side and 2 dock gates. Garrett would cover the main entries, would expect Kyle to be 6 hours away making decisions about the archive, not here inside 90 minutes. That expectation was the only advantage Kyle had, and he needed to spend it correctly. He found the first man at the east dock gate, one of Garrett's, someone he didn't recognize, posted at the corner of a container stack with his attention pointed outward toward the water. Kyle came up behind him in a corridor of shadow, and the man was unconscious and down before he'd processed that something was wrong. Kyle moved the body behind a container, took the earpiece and the radio, and listened. Two voices, Garrett and someone else. Short transmissions, operational, the cadence of professionals managing a contained situation. One reference to the woman, still, quiet, cooperative. One reference to the kid, same, alive, both of them. Something in his chest that had been locked at maximum tension for 90 minutes dropped approximately 1 degree. He moved deeper into the facility. The interior of the main warehouse was split into a working floor and a raised office structure along the back wall. A glass-fronted mezzanine that overlooked the entire space, accessible by a steel staircase on the south end. Kyle had sat in that office 100 times, had looked down at the floor below from those windows. He knew exactly what the sightlines from up there covered, and more importantly, what they didn't. He came in through a loading bay access on the northwest corner, a panel that was supposed to be alarmed, but whose alarm he'd personally disabled 3 years ago during a renovation and never reinstated because he'd forgotten it existed until right now when he needed it to exist. He came through into the working floor and stopped. Evelyn and Rowan were seated in the center of the space on 2 chairs that had been positioned facing the south wall, their backs to the door he'd entered. Evelyn's hands were zip-tied to the chair arms. Rowan's were in his lap, untied, and the sight of that, his son sitting in a chair in a warehouse with his hands free because someone had made the calculation that a 9-year-old didn't need restraining, produced a specific cold fury that Kyle had to physically hold down through his jaw and his shoulders and the deliberate pattern of his breathing. Garrett was on the mezzanine above, visible through the glass. One other man on the floor, posted near the south wall, facing the main entrance, which was why he hadn't seen the northwest access. Evelyn turned her head slightly, some peripheral awareness shifting, and he moved 2 feet to the left into the shadow of a pallet stack, and she didn't find him. But the slight movement of her head had made Rowan turn, following his mother's attention instinctively. And the boy's eyes moved through the dim space and found Kyle in the shadow and stopped there. 9 years old, smart enough to hide it. Rowan turned his head back to the front without any change of expression. Kyle held up 2 fingers, pointed up, pointed at the floor man, held up 1 finger. Rowan didn't respond visibly, but his right hand, resting in his lap, extended 2 fingers and then 1, confirming what his father had said. Something happened in Kyle's chest that he didn't have time for and filed away for later. He circled south through the pallet stacks, keeping low, working the shadows, watching the floor man's back and measuring the distance and the angles. The floor man was professional. His posture was correct, his attention consistent. He wasn't on his phone, wasn't distracted. That meant this required pace rather than patience. Kyle covered the last 15 feet in 4 quick strides, and the floor man turned just fast enough to register a presence before Kyle closed the distance, and the engagement was brief and violent, and ended with the man on the concrete, conscious but not functional. The radio crackled. "Vance," Garrett's voice from the mezzanine. "Check in." Kyle picked up the radio. "Clear," he said, low, adjusting his register toward the cadence he'd heard from Vance on the earpiece. A pause. "You sound like shit." "Moving some freight. Loud." Another pause, longer, the kind that meant someone was deciding whether what they'd heard was right. "KL." Garrett's voice shifted. Just his name. Flat. Kale dropped the radio and moved to the staircase. He hit the first landing, and Garrett was already at the top. Had come out of the mezzanine office, and was at the head of the stairs, and they met on the narrow steel landing 12 feet up with the warehouse floor below them and the gray window light coming through the mezzanine glass behind him. Garrett was holding a weapon. Kyle was holding the knife. They stood like that for 3 seconds. Garrett was mid-40s, ex-military, the kind of physical conditioning that came from discipline rather than vanity. He had worked for Kyle for 7 years. His face right now was the face of a man who had made a sequence of choices he hadn't loved and had arrived at the end of them and found himself here. "Put it down," Garrett said. "No." "Kyle, I don't want." "How long?" The words came out with more force than he'd intended. "How long have you been in their pocket?" Garrett's jaw worked. 4 years. 4 years. He held it. "You drove my son through the streets of this city last night." He was safe. I would not have let... You were in my house. The control in his voice was costing him now. You were in my operation. Every meeting I had, every decision I made, I know. Garrett's voice was rough. I know what I did. I don't have a version of this where I'm the good guy, Kyle. I'm not trying to sell you one. Then what are you trying to do? Finish it. His grip on the weapon shifted, not threateningly, more like he was tired of the weight of it. The people I report to, the task force, the handler, they want the archive. They get it, this ends. You get Aurora and the boy, you walk away from this specific situation, and whatever comes after is a different problem. They're law enforcement. Yes. So they take the archive, and they build the case they've been trying to build for 14 years, and they come for me. Garrett didn't answer, which was an answer. Your handler, Kyle said. Name. I can't. Name. Kyle. Is it the same prosecutor? The one Marcus was feeding? Something shifted in Garrett's face. A micro-expression. Fast. Not quite controlled. How do you know about... Name. Holloway. The word came out like it cost something. Rachel Holloway, Southern District of New York. Cale moved. Not toward Garrett. Down. Below the angle of the weapon. One hand on the staircase railing and his body dropping inside the shot radius before Garrett could fully adjust. And the weapon discharged against the ceiling with a crack that split the warehouse air and rained concrete dust, and Kyle drove upward with the knife reversed in his grip. Handle, not blade. And connected with Garrett's forearm with enough force to break the grip. And then they were at the same level on the narrow landing, and it was close and ugly, and neither of them was clean. Garrett was bigger through the shoulder. Kyle was faster, and had the specific motivation of a man fighting for something he'd only just found. It lasted 45 seconds. It covered the landing and part of the upper staircase and finished with Garrett against the mezzanine wall, one arm at a wrong angle, breathing hard, the weapon gone somewhere down to the floor below. Cale stood over him, breathing through his nose, blood from a cut on his cheekbone moving warm and slow to his jaw. Don't get up, he said. Garrett didn't get up. Cale went down the stairs. He cut Evelyn's zip ties with the ankle knife. She stood up immediately, the controlled fury of a woman who has been sitting with her hands bound while things happened that she couldn't affect radiating off her in a way that was almost physical. Her eyes moved over him, the blood on his face, the set of his shoulders, and she made a fast clinical assessment and then turned to Rowan. You okay? She asked her son. Yeah. Rowan was standing, backpack somehow still over one shoulder. He'd had it when they took them, apparently, and no one had taken it from him. He was looking at Kyle. You came fast. Yes, Cale said. I didn't think it'd be that fast. I had a reason to move quickly. Something moved through the boy's face. Not quite a smile, too much held in it to be a smile, something more complicated that he was managing with the particular gravity of a 9-year-old who understood that certain things had weight. We need to move, Evelyn said. Garrett had at least one more outside. Petrov is incoming. 15 minutes. Kyle was already moving toward the northwest access point. There's something I need to do first. What? He stopped. Turned. She was looking at him with the directness she'd had from the beginning of this. The directness that had survived 8 years of being alone with it. Lucien thinks I'm still processing the meeting, he said. He thinks I have 6 hours and no information and no allies. He paused. Solis has been building something for the last 2 hours. A package. Every piece of traceable evidence of what Lucien has been moving through my organization for the past decade. Payments, routing, shell companies, the works. He looked at her. If I can put that package in Rachel Holloway's hands before she knows Garrett's operation has collapsed, she has 2 options. Take the archive and come for me with a case that I can challenge, or take the Lucien Dre evidence and build a case that is airtight and ends the actual threat. He paused. I need you to make that call. To Holloway. Evelyn stared at him. Why me? Because you're the one she can't dismiss. You have 8 years of documentation, of living proof that Lucian Dre manufactured evidence and drove a witness into hiding. You're the case she didn't know she had. He held her gaze. If it comes from you, it's real. If it comes from me, it's a criminal trying to trade his way out. She looked at him for a long, still moment. You're asking me to surface, she said. Everything I buried. Yes. Everything I built to stay safe. Evelyn Hart. The life. I know what I'm asking. She looked at Rowan, who was looking back at her with those gray eyes, waiting. If I do this, she said quietly, it has to work. We don't get another version of this. I know. And Lucien Dre will not be a free man inside 48 hours if Solis's package is what I think it is. He said it with the flatness of certainty. Another silence. Then Evelyn held out her hand. He gave her the phone. She dialed the number he gave her. The direct line Garrett had mentioned, the one that bypassed the main task force routing. And it rang twice before a woman's voice answered, professional, slightly guarded. Holloway. My name is Aurora Vale, Evelyn said. Her voice was completely steady. I've been missing for 8 years. I know who killed my brother and why, and I have enough to take down the man who did it. But you have about 40 minutes to decide whether you want to go after him or keep running the case you've been building against the wrong person. A beat of silence, then, where are you? Charleston. But Lucien Dre is still in a private dining room in the French Quarter of this city right now, and if someone doesn't have eyes on him in the next 30 minutes, he will be on a plane by the time you I have assets in Charleston, Holloway said. Her voice had shifted, sharper, leaning in. I can have them on location in... The warehouse's main entrance blew in. Not a knock, not a handle. The doors came off their tracks with the percussion of something mechanical applied at force, and in the sudden gap of gray daylight and cold harbor air, 4 men came through in tactical formation with weapons raised in the particular economy of movement that came from recent military service. But they weren't Lucien's men. The lead figure came through with a phone to his ear and lowered it when he saw the space and did a rapid sweep, and his eyes landed on Kael. Petrov, Kael said. Told you 15 minutes. Petrov looked at the room. Garrett visible at the top of the staircase, arm at a wrong angle. The unconscious Vance near the south wall, the tableau of a situation already resolved. He looked at Evelyn and Rowan and then back at Kael. You started without me. I was motivated. Kael turned back to Evelyn, who still had the phone at her ear. Holloway still on? Yes, Evelyn said. She wants GPS coordinates. Give her the harbor address. He turned to Petrov. I need a vehicle. Now. Where are you going? Back to the French Quarter. He moved toward the door. Lucien Dre is still sitting in a dining room waiting for me to call him from New York, having made a decision about his ultimatum. He picked up his jacket from the floor, where it had fallen in the struggle on the stairs, and shrugged it on. I'm going to give him his answer in person. Evelyn looked up from the phone. Kael. He stopped. What I said last night. Her voice was low and careful. About not doing anything outside the law. I remember. I mean it now more than I meant it then. He held her gaze across the warehouse floor. His son stood beside her with his backpack over one shoulder and his eyes steady and the gray morning light coming through the broken entrance behind them. I know, he said. He went through the door. The drive back to the French Quarter took 11 minutes through empty post-storm streets, Petrov at the wheel, Kael in the passenger seat with his phone to his ear, and Solis's voice walking him through the final status of the package. 147 separate file fragments, 12 years of traceable transactions, 17 distinct shell company networks, all branching back to the same root structure and the same set of authorization signatures. Not Kael's. Never Kael's. Lucien Dre's name embedded in the architecture of every deception like a signature carved into stone. Send it, Kael said. To the Holloway address? And to 3 other locations. The U.S. Attorney's Office in New York, the Financial Crimes Unit in D.C., and the Charleston Field Office of the FBI. He paused. All simultaneous. That's a lot of agencies, Kael. Yes. He watched the city moving past the window. The old pastel houses, the iron fences, the streets still wet and gleaming from the storm that had finally, completely ended. He spent 18 years learning how to make things disappear. I want to make sure this is the one thing he can't. The car pulled to the curb outside the members' club. Kyle got out, looked up at the window on the second floor where he'd sat across from Lucien Dre less than 3 hours ago and listened to a man confess to the ordered murder of his son's uncle and frame it as a service rendered. Petrov put the car in park. You want backup? No. Kyle, stay here. He straightened his jacket, felt the bruise along his left ribs from the landing fight, the dried blood on his cheek, the particular exhausted clarity of a body that has been running on something beyond adrenaline and is now on the far side of it. If I'm not out in 20 minutes, call Holloway and give her the building address. He went inside. The dining room was exactly as he'd left it. The coffee cups, the window, the rain-dried street below. Lucien Dre was still at the table. He looked up when Kyle came in and read something in his face, the blood, the posture, the speed of his entry. And the patient urbanity shifted, very slightly, into something more guarded. You went to the harbor, he said. Yes. That was faster than... Where's the original order? Kyle closed the door behind him and stayed standing. The one I gave you, 8 years ago. Handle it. Where is it? Lucien paused. I don't keep... You kept everything. You've been keeping everything for 30 years because that's how men like you stay alive, but not through power, but through paper. He looked at him directly. The recording, the documentation, whatever form handle it exists in, you have it, because if you didn't have it, you couldn't use it against me. And if you couldn't use it against me, I would have been in a federal courtroom 6 years ago. Lucien was very still. I'm not here to take it from you, Kyle said. I'm here to tell you that in approximately the last 12 minutes, Rachel Holloway at the Southern District of New York received a complete forensic accounting of every financial crime you have committed using my organizational infrastructure for the past decade. Not mine, yours. He paused. You have a choice. You can sit in that chair and wait for federal agents who are currently on their way to this building to walk through that door and begin a process that will take 18 months and end with you in a federal prison. Or you can give me the documentation, the original order, everything you have, and I can use it to demonstrate to the same federal prosecutor that the crimes of this organization were committed under duress and manipulation by a man who had infiltrated its leadership at the highest level. That's not, Lucien started. It's not a deal, Kyle said. It's not a negotiation. It's a description of the two versions of what happens in the next hour, and you get to choose which version you're in. He looked at the older man with the flat, complete attention of someone who had finished being afraid of the answer. You spent 18 years making yourself indispensable. You spent 8 of those years letting me believe I was responsible for the death of the woman I loved's brother. You took my son's first 9 years. His voice stayed level. It was the hardest thing in the room. I am not going to put a hand on you. I'm not going to do anything that gives you a story to tell about me that isn't already true. He paused. But I'm going to watch you face what you built. And I'm going to make sure there is no version of this city, this country, or this world where you walk away from. Lucien Dre reached into his jacket pocket. Kyle didn't move, didn't reach for the knife at his ankle or step back from the table. He stood exactly where he was and watched, and what Lucien produced was not a weapon. It was a small black drive, the kind you could buy at any electronics store, the kind that looked like it weighed nothing and contained everything. He set it on the table between them. There are 3 copies, Lucien said, 2 in locations that will surface automatically if I'm arrested without having canceled a standing instruction in the next 72 hours. He looked at the drive. That one is yours. Kale didn't touch it yet. The recording, he said, on the drive. Everything is on the drive. Lucien's voice had lost its practiced smoothness, not broken exactly, but settled into something that had stopped performing. An old man's voice, stripped of its instrument. 31 years of documentation, things that protect me and things that implicate me in equal measure. Including the order. Including the order. He looked up. Your voice, your words, The full context, which does not make it better but does make it different from what you've been carrying. He paused. You said handle it. What you meant was remove him from the operation, relocate him, cut contact. I know that now because I've listened to it enough times to hear what's underneath what you said. A long pause. I chose not to hear it then. Cale picked up the drive. He held it in his palm for a moment, the weight of it, which was nothing, which was everything, and put it in his jacket pocket. The other 2 copies, he said. The instruction will be cancelled. Lucien met his eyes. You have my word. Your word. I understand what that's worth to you right now. He didn't look away. It's all I have left to give. Downstairs through the building's old walls, Cale could hear the sound of vehicles. Multiple. The particular cadence of official arrival, the way federal agents moved, organized, and unhurried, the sound of authority that didn't need to announce itself. Lucien heard it too. He looked at the window, at the street below, at something past the glass that wasn't visible from where Cale was standing. His face went through several things in a short span, and then it went still in the way of men who have finally reached the thing they'd been running toward and running from simultaneously, and found it to be exactly what they'd always known it was. I built more than I destroyed, he said quietly. Not to Cale specifically, to the window, to whatever accounting he was running internally. I want that to mean something. It doesn't change what you did. No. He folded his hands on the table. But it's still true. Cale moved to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame, didn't turn around. Aurora's brother, he said. Marcus, he was 26 years old. Yes. He was trying to do something he believed in. Yes. And you killed him for it. The room was quiet. Outside, the sound of footsteps on the building's front steps. Yes, Lucien said. The word was barely audible, just a breath with a consonant in it. Just an old man at a table with his hands folded and his life arriving at its last accounting. Cale went through the door without looking back. He passed 2 federal agents on the stairs, coming up. They looked at him, at the blood on his cheek, the general evidence of a difficult morning, and he held up both hands in a neutral gesture and said, "Second floor, dining room, he's waiting." And they moved past him with the focused professionalism of people with a job to do, and he continued down and out the front door and into the cold Charleston morning. Petrov's car was at the curb. Cale got in and said nothing for a long moment, just sat in the passenger seat and felt the particular exhaustion of a body that had been running on something unsustainable and had just been told it could stop. "Harbor?" Petrov asked. "Harbor," he said. What? Evelyn was sitting on a crate outside the warehouse entrance when they pulled up, her face turned toward the water. Rowan was beside her eating something from a vending machine wrapper. Petrov's men had apparently made a supply run. And when the car stopped, he looked up and watched Cale get out with the specific alertness he used when he was deciding whether a situation was still dangerous. Cale walked to them and stopped. Evelyn looked at his face. Read it. The blood, the set of his shoulders, the particular quality of stillness that meant something had concluded rather than paused. She didn't ask the question. She already had the answer. "Holloway's agents picked him up," she said. "Should be in custody by now." He looked at Rowan. "You eat?" "Chips," Rowan said, "and a granola bar. It was bad. I'll get you real food." "Okay." Rowan looked at him with the careful directness he'd been using since the warehouse. The look of someone who had decided to take a thing seriously. "Are we done running?" The question, from a 9-year-old, with all the weight that 9 years of moving and not asking too many questions and reading his mother's voice when it meant now, the weight of all of it compressed into 4 words, delivered without drama, just a boy wanting to know whether the thing that had shaped his entire life was finally, actually, finished. Cale crouched down to his level. It put his face at a cut on his cheekbone that he'd forgotten was there until the shift in position reminded him, and he ignored it. "Yes," he said. "We're done running." Rowan nodded once, processing it. Then he held out the second half of the granola bar. "You want some? It's pretty bad, but you look like you need it." Cale took it. "Thank you." Rowan went back to watching the harbor water. Cale stood up and found Evelyn looking at him with something that wasn't quite the directness she'd been carrying for the last 18 hours. Something different underneath it. Something that was trying to decide whether it was allowed to surface. Solis's package, she said. Sent. 4 separate agencies. He watched the water. Holloway doesn't have a choice now. The Lucy Yen Dre case is bigger than anything she was building against me, and she knows it, and the 3 other agencies receiving simultaneous documentation mean she can't suppress it without a level of institutional conspiracy that doesn't survive contact with reality. He paused. She'll take the deal. What deal? My full cooperation with the Dre prosecution. Complete financial disclosure and restructuring under federal oversight. He paused. In exchange for consideration on the charges against the organization. Consideration, she said. Not a question. Not quite. It won't be clean, he said. It won't be quick. There will be a process, and it will be difficult, and I will probably spend a significant portion of the next 2 years in depositions and proceedings. He looked at her. But at the end of it, it's finished. Legitimately, completely. He paused. The empire Lucian used against you, against all of us, won't exist in the same form. I've known for years it needed to end. I just didn't have a reason that was bigger than my resistance to ending it. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. The harbor moved behind her. A pelican crossed the gray sky with the indifferent grace of birds who don't track human catastrophe. You have one now, she said. Yes. She looked at Rowan, still sitting on his crate with his feet dangling, watching the water with the self-contained calm that she had never entirely understood and had always loved most fiercely about him. He's going to have questions, she said. Real ones, not the 9-year-old versions. I know. About Marcus, about what happened, about what you are and what you've done. She looked back at Kyle. I'm not going to lie to him about any of it. Whatever we build from here, it doesn't get built on edited history. I wouldn't want it to be. He held her gaze. I spent 18 years building something on the wrong foundation. I know what that costs. She absorbed this. The wind off the water moved through her dark hair, and she didn't fix it. Somewhere inside the warehouse, Petrov was organizing the cleanup with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd been doing this kind of work long enough to treat it like maintenance. Garrett, she said. He cooperated, called Holloway himself from the landing before Petrov's people got there. Gave her everything. The handler contacts, the case file references, 14 months of communication logs. He paused. He made his choices and he'll face what comes from them. But he didn't compound it. Is that enough for you? He thought about that honestly. About 7 years of a man sitting across from him at operational tables, attending his meetings, driving his car, and feeding it all to a federal prosecutor 2 states north. About the specific violation of that, the texture of it, the way it would have to be integrated into the reconstruction of what was real. No, he said, but it's what there is. Rachel Holloway called at 2 in the afternoon. Evelyn took the call alone, standing at the far end of the dock, with the harbor at her back and the voice of the Southern District of New York in her ear. A woman's voice, precise and controlled, carrying the weight of a career built on cases that didn't stay clean. We have Dre in custody, Holloway said. His attorney is already making noise, but the documentation your associate sent it's significant. It's going to take time to process fully, but my preliminary read is that this is comprehensive. It is, Evelyn said. I want to ask you something directly. A pause. The original investigation, the case Marcus Vale was building before his death. Part of that case was built on information he provided about Kyle Vescari's operations, specific documented criminal activity. Another pause. That doesn't disappear because Lucian Dre turns out to be a larger target. I know. What Vescari is proposing, full cooperation, financial disclosure, restructuring, that process will require honesty about what the organization has done. Not just Dre's portion, all of it. Her voice was measured, careful. Is he prepared for that? Evelyn looked out at the water, at the way the afternoon light was finally breaking through the cloud cover in long, angled rays that turned the harbor surface from gray to something almost silver. He was prepared for it before he knew about Rowan, she said. He's more prepared now. A long pause. The child, my son, is not part of this conversation. I understand. I'm only asking but my son is 9 years old and he has nothing to do with any documentation, any case, any proceeding. He is completely outside this. Her voice was even and absolute. That's a condition, not a request. Another pause. Then, quietly, understood. That's not where we're going. Holloway's voice settled into something more human than prosecutorial. Ms. Vale, Aurora, you've been gone a long time. Yes. Coming back into this it's going to have a cost. Your testimony, your documentation, what you saw 8 years ago. It's all relevant. It will all be used. A pause. I want to be honest with you about what this process looks like. I've been honest about hard things for 8 years, Evelyn said. I can handle the process. I believe you. A brief pause. We'll need to meet. Soon. Tell me when and where. The call ended. Evelyn stood on the dock for a moment longer, not thinking exactly, just existing in the specific aftermath of a decision that had been made and couldn't be unmade, and was, she understood with a bone-deep clarity, the right one. She turned back toward the warehouse. Rowan was standing at the end of the dock, 20 feet behind her. He had walked up quietly while she was on the call. Had that from her, the ability to move without announcing himself, and was watching her with his hands in the pockets of his soccer jersey and the wind off the water doing things to his hair. Were you listening? She asked. Some of it. He walked toward her. You're going to have to testify about stuff. Yes. About my Uncle Marcus. She looked at him. 8 years of not talking about Marcus, of keeping her brother a private grief, a sealed room, and her son saying his name out loud in the afternoon harbor air with the matter-of-fact gentleness of someone who had pieced a story together from the fragments she'd never realized she'd been leaving. How do you know about Marcus? She asked. Your notebook, the one in the blue cover that you've moved every time we moved. He met her eyes. I looked once, years ago. I'm sorry, but I remember what it said. She sat down on the dock boards, just sat down, right there, her feet at the edge. He sat beside her. He was trying to do something good, she said. He was trying to dismantle something that hurt people. He went about it in a way that got him killed. She looked at the water. He was 26, and he was brave, and he was wrong about some things, and right about the thing that mattered, and someone murdered him for it. She paused. He would have been a good uncle to you. Rowan thought about this seriously. What was he like? Stubborn. Funny in a way that snuck up on you. He made terrible coffee and was convinced he made great coffee and would not hear otherwise. She paused. He had your laugh. I realized that when you were about 4. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then, are we going to be okay? Actually okay, not the version where you say yes because I need to hear it. She looked at her son, at the person he had become in 9 years of a life she had built imperfectly and fiercely and with everything she had. I don't know exactly what okay looks like yet, she said. I know it involves staying in one place long enough to find out. She paused. I know it involves your father. She watched his face. I know it involves a lot of things we haven't figured out the shape of. But we're going to figure them out. Yes. He leaned his shoulder against hers. Not a child's lean, a deliberate, considered press of weight, person to person. Okay, he said, like it was a decision. Kyle found them still sitting there 20 minutes later. He came down the dock and stopped a few feet back, recognizing without being told that he was approaching something that had its own gravity and required being asked into rather than assumed. He stood with his hands in his pockets and waited. Rowan looked back over his shoulder, looked at his mother. She nodded once. Rowan stood up, moved to Cale's left, and sat back down on the dock, leaving a space between himself and Evelyn. An obvious space. The architecture of an invitation, from a 9-year-old who apparently had his mother's particular precision, even in the gestures he didn't know he was making. Cale sat down in the space, The three of them sat at the edge of the dock with the harbor moving beneath them and the afternoon light doing its slow work on the water, and no one said anything for a long moment, which was, Kyle understood, exactly right. "How's the cheek?" Rowan said. "Hurts. There's a first aid kit in Petrov's van. I'll get it later. It looks bad." "I've had worse." Rowan considered this. "From what?" "Various things." "Like what?" Cale looked at the boy beside him, the gray eyes steady and curious and waiting, the same waiting patience that had let him sit in a warehouse chair without showing fear while the situation resolved itself around him. The same waiting patience that was, Kyle understood, a quality he himself had once had before the years of the Empire had replaced it with control. "I'll tell you," he said. "Not today, but I'll tell you." Rowan absorbed this with a nod that meant he understood it for what it was, a real promise, not a deflection. They sat. After a while, Rowan said, "I'm hungry. Real food." "There's a place 2 streets from here," Kyle said. "Gumbo. Best in the city. You've eaten here before?" "A few times." "Before you knew we were here?" A pause. "Yes." Rowan thought about the strangeness of that, his father eating gumbo 2 streets from their life without knowing it, and apparently decided it was too much to untangle right now and filed it for later, which was, Kyle thought, probably the wisest response available. They stood up, the 3 of them. The dock beneath them, the harbor behind, the city ahead. Evelyn caught Kyle's eyes for a moment across Rowan's head. Not warmth yet. Warmth was a thing that would come back slowly, if it came back, rebuilt from different materials than what they'd had before. What she gave him was something more fundamental, an acknowledgement. A woman who had survived 8 years of a life she hadn't chosen, looking at the man she had run from and seeing clearly, without sentimentality or illusion, what he actually was. Not what she'd believed him to be, not what Lucian Dre had manufactured, but the actual thing. Flawed and costly, and here, he held it. Then they walked off the dock together toward the city. 6 months later, Kyle Vescari appeared voluntarily before a federal grand jury in New York and gave 11 hours of testimony over 2 days. He answered every question. He did not minimize, redirect, or request breaks except for lunch. His attorney, who had been preparing for the worst, was professionally surprised by the comprehensiveness of his cooperation. The Lucien Dre prosecution moved quickly by federal standards. The documentation Solis had assembled was, as Holloway had said, significant. Dre was indicted on 31 counts covering organized crime conspiracy, financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and a charge relating to the death of Marcus Vail that took another 4 months to construct, but held when it was finally built. He did not take a plea. He went to trial 18 months after his arrest, and the jury deliberated for 2 days, and the verdict was what the evidence had always been pointing toward. Garrett cooperated fully and received a reduced sentence and served it, and was eventually released and moved somewhere quiet, and was not heard from again in any context that touched any of these lives. The Vescari organization was restructured over the course of a 1.5 years under federal oversight. Assets liquidated, legitimate enterprises retained and reorganized under a compliance structure that was watched closely for 3 years before the oversight was relaxed. It was not a clean process. There were smaller prosecutions attached to it, men who had done things under the organization's umbrella who faced their own accountings. Kyle did not attempt to protect them from this. He had promised honesty about all of it, and he delivered honesty about all of it, and the cost of that was real, and he paid it. Aurora Vail resurfaced legally 8 months after Charleston. The documentation process was bureaucratically complicated and emotionally stark in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. Sitting across tables from federal officials and reconstructing the story of a life she'd erased, piece by piece, the architecture of Evelyn Hart dismantled as carefully and completely as it had been built. She kept the apartment on the east side of Charleston. She kept the car. She kept the job at Tidewater Grill until she didn't need to anymore. And she left on good terms, and Marco the sous chef shook her hand and called her by both her names and didn't ask any questions. Rowan knew everything by the time he was 10, not all at once. In pieces, given to him at the pace his age could hold, in the honest language his mother had always used with him, because he had always deserved it. He asked hard questions and got hard answers, and he took them the way he took most difficult things, with the particular gravity of a person who had been prepared for complexity since before he knew what to call it. He met Kyl's world gradually. Not the criminal architecture of it that was being dismantled, but the human structure underneath it, the people who had served it, some of whom were worth knowing and some of whom were not. The history of decisions made long before Rowan was born that had shaped the life he'd inherited. He held all of it with more grace than either of his parents felt they deserved. His teacher that year said he was thoughtful, that he asked questions that were older than his face. Evelyn said she knew. On a Tuesday in early November, Rowan had a baseball game in a park off Rutledge Avenue, 4 blocks from a harbor warehouse that none of them mentioned anymore. Kyle arrived late. The depositions had run long, and found a spot on the bleacher beside Evelyn, who had saved it with her jacket and handed him a paper cup of coffee that was cold, and said nothing about the time, just shifted her jacket from the seat and looked back at the field. Rowan was at second base. He was not a natural athlete. He had his mother's economy and his father's stubbornness, which made him adequate rather than gifted. But he covered his position with a focused competence that made the coaches keep him in the starting 9. He had, over the last several months, developed opinions about baseball that he expressed at length and without solicitation, which Kyle found unexpectedly enjoyable. A hit went to right field. Rowan moved, read the trajectory, moved to back up the throw to second, was exactly where he needed to be when the ball arrived. The runner was out. Small play, correct execution, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what it looked like when a person was developing the habit of being exactly where they needed to be. Kyle watched him trot back to position. The cold coffee was bad. The bleacher was hard. Evelyn's shoulder was 2 inches from his and had been there for the last 4 innings. She was wearing a dark coat he didn't recognize. Something new, something she'd bought for herself in the particular small way of a person who had recently begun to invest in permanence. "He's been working on that read," she said. "The trajectory. He asked me last week how you figure out where a ball's going before it gets there. What did you tell him?" "I told him you watch the hit, not the ball." She paused. "He spent an entire practice staring at batters. Did it work?" "He threw a kid out at first who had no business being thrown out at first." A slight, real smile. "So yes." Cale looked at the field, at his son at second base, hands on knees, reading the next batter. "He's going to be all right," he said. "He already is." She said it simply, without the protective reflex she'd carried it with for years. Just a fact. Her son was all right. She knew this the way she knew the deadbolt and the apartment and her own name. Not as a thing she'd constructed to believe, but as something she could verify by looking directly at it. The game moved forward. The afternoon went gold and then orange across the outfield grass, the specific November light that makes American fields look like they were built for exactly this, for exactly these ordinary stakes. In the 7th inning, Rowan hit a line drive into the gap in left center that scored 2 runs and sent him to third base standing, and the small crowd made the noise small crowds make for this kind of moment, disproportionate and genuine and local. And Kyle stood up from the bleacher without planning to. He clapped. Just that. 2 hands making the sound that means I saw it. I'm here. That was good. Rowan, at third base, turned toward the bleachers, found his father standing, and in the specific emotional economy of a 10-year-old boy who had spent his life learning not to need too much, he allowed himself, briefly, to look like he was glad. Then he turned back to the game. Cale sat down. His shoulder settled against Evelyn's, and she didn't move away from it. Below them, the field was bright with the last of the afternoon. In the gap between the outfield fence and the tree line, the harbor was just visible, silver-gray, moving, indifferent to everything that had happened in its proximity and everything that was happening now. The game was not yet finished. There were innings left. But the run had been scored, and the moment had been witnessed, and the cold coffee was empty, and the bleacher was still hard, and the man sitting on it, for the first time in a very long time, was not measuring the exits. He was just watching his son play baseball. It was after everything, enough. It was after everything, everything.